MSI's A320M Grenade is a good example of what happens when the manufacturer decides not to chip out completely when building a motherboard, even though it uses a budget-oriented chipset. However, there is one thing where this lovely motherboard falls short compared to the Gigabyte GA320M-H reviewed previously. As already visible, the faces used for the memory controller have two high-side MOSFETs and two low-side MOSFETs. This configuration benefits from lower resistance and its effects, less power dissipated as heat, and longer longevity for the MOSFETs. The V-core phases have a similar configuration, with similar benefits on thermals. Add to that the heatsink that is placed on top of them, and one can stay assured that the board will run just fine with any Ryzen 5 CPU placed in it. Heck, one might feel safe enough to try out a Ryzen 7. The board has two DDR4 DIMM slots, very much like the previously reviewed Gigabyte board. And just like it, they are of the same variant, with clips at both ends. Just like the GA320M-H we reviewed previously, the MSI board has the same expansion slots, 2 PCIe x 1 and 1 PCIe x 16. But unlike the Gigabyte board, the placement of the PCIe x 1 slots is much more sensible, with one being placed above the 16-lane slot and the other one being placed almost at the bottom of the board. This then allows using a 2-slot GPU and still being able to use the two PCIe 1 slots. The card does have a single M.2 slot that is capable of holding drives up to 2280, which is probably going to cover the needs of most PC builders. The SATA ports are also placed so that they remain usable, two of them well above the PCIe x 16 slot and two next to the PCH. But unlike the Gigabyte board, these two lower ports are at a 90 degrees angle. This means that one can still run two straight data cables and still not interfere with the GPU. This board impressed me also when it comes to pin headers. You have your usual front audio, a 14-pin TPM header, the less usual serial and parallel ports, then back to the more common two USB 2 ports and one USB 3. The lower side of the board also has the front panel connector and the speaker pin headers. But just above the speaker header, we have a 12 volts RGB pin header. That's 5 to 15% more FPS right there. And while the clear CMOS pins are to be expected, this board also has a pin header for in-circuit programming of the SPI chip. This means that with the right tools, one can flash another BIOS on the board without even having a CPU in the socket. The rear I/O is decent in my opinion. There is only one PS2 connector and two USB 2.0 Type A to connect peripherals like a mouse and keyboard. You also get 4 Type A USB 3.0, a gigabit LAN connector, and your typical 3-jack audio. You get 3 options for video output if you run an APU. I expect the HDMI connector to be used most, but DVI-D and VGA are also available. Back to the audio, I did a similar recording test like we did for the previously reviewed Gigabyte board. This is an audio test for the A320 Grenade, rear I/O, volume 100%, preamp 0. While significantly better than Gigabyte's A320M-H, it's still not something I'd use to record my videos. The BIOS setup utility is pretty nice. Unfortunately, this is where the Grenade loses to the Gigabyte board. MSI offers the same level of control over the DRAM timings, voltages, and XMP profiles like the Gigabyte board. It also allows you to specify a voltage offset for the CPU, and this one is quite important considering that AMD recommended board manufacturers to ignore TSMC's 1.35 volts limits for their 7nm silicon and to go as high as 1.45 volts for V-core, shortening the lifespan of the CPU. A 100 mV undervolt is a very good safety measure, and MSI will let you set it. What MSI however doesn't allow you to change is the CPU frequency multiplier. And this is not a limitation of the A320 chipset. Gigabyte allows you to change it. MSI however decided to allow that one only for the more expensive B and X series boards. To add a minor insult to a small injury, MSI however will allow you to save OC profiles on a USB stick. Good for saving memory timings. I'm just thinking that others might trade that for access to the CPU multiplier. The way you can specify a custom fan curve in MSI's BIOS is a bit more clunky, where you do that by manually specifying a fan RPM percentage at a specified temperature. It works, but it is less friendly than what Gigabyte offers. As for rebar and TPM settings, nothing out of the ordinary here. Both are available and will allow you to make the most of your ARC GPU and to install Windows 11 respectively. I paid only $5 for this board, because it was sold as defective. But I was not the first option for the seller of this board, and I can't really fault him for that. For 5 USD, he probably wanted to avoid the hassles of shipping it. It may very well be that the first buyer was horrified by how the BIOS circuit looked, with the conformal coating removed from the 1.8 volt trace and the SPI chip soldered backwards. Regardless of the reason, the seller released the board, and this time around he was more than willing to send it. The BIOS chip, as it turned out, was not just soldered backwards, but also defective. The people trying to work on this board did quite a number on it, with a few resistors also missing. I managed to find the values for the missing resistors and solder them back, but for the BIOS chip, I had to take one from a different board and reprogram it using a CH431A tool and the appropriate voltage adapter before soldering it back to the MSI board. I love this little board. It seems to be better built than some of the B450s Pros or B550 Primes out there, and I think it was worth the effort of repairing it. The heatsink on the V-core phases will allow you to use a better, less noisy tower cooler instead of the ones bundled with the CPU. And did I mention RGB? This one has a 12 volts connector, and let's face it, everyone knows that RGB is like plus 10% performance. Joking aside, this one is a keeper, unlike the one we'll be taking a look next time, but that's for later. We're done with this one. Thanks for watching, I hope you liked it, and I'll see you